Ever since I started flying, I had to work to keep from dying, especially since I came to Vietnam. Seems on every combat sortie, that's when Charlie tries to zord me, when I'm shooting guns and dropping bombs.
Okay, it's Doug Davis, and I was a pilot. I was flying the EC-47. We had 5 airplanes there. They weren't really assigned to the base, I believe.
What was your role or your mission with the EC-47?
I started as a co-pilot and aircraft commander, and then an instructor pilot.
And now, what were some of the mission roles that you would pull with the EC-47? Were you monitoring the trail, or were you, what were you doing while you were there?
Okay, well, first off, it was very highly classified at the time, but now it's on the internet and stuff. But we normally take off from NKP every time, go to Northern Laos, and we were supporting the Hmongs and the CIA up there.
Dropping off equipment?
No,
troops,
we were...
Or electronics? And I apologize for my ignorance of the EC-47.
Not a problem. Like I say, it was a very classified program. And we flew the Air Force Security Service people in the back of the airplane, and we were monitoring enemy radios. Most people don't understand, there were, depending on what time it was, 50, 60,000 North Vietnamese troops in Laos. It wasn't Pathet Lao, they were North Vietnamese. And they had radios. And we could listen to them. We could copy their code. And we could direction find where they are. And then pass that on to whoever the user of that intelligence was.
Now, did your information go down into Task Force Alpha for dissemination, or they were just doing the photo reconnaissance in that building in Task Force Alpha? I was wondering where the electronic information wound up. Do you know where that wound up? Did that go to Saigon, or where did your information wind up?
I never knew up until about 2 years ago. I got frustrated because I go to these reunions, and I've met several of the CIA people that were on the ground fighting with the Hmongs, and they didn't even know we were there.
Really?
And then I learned, this is a bit of a news flash, that Jim Clapper, the retired Director of National Intelligence, he was at NKP. He had a tour there. He was commander of the Security Service detachment when he was an Air Force captain. And our tours overlapped.
Really?
About 5 months. And I didn't know him at the time. We all wore sanitized uniforms. We didn't have rank or anything on it, so I didn't know if we had a captain in the back or not. And they briefed us, just kind of stay away from the spooks, you know. And so we didn't intermingle much. They were doing their job. My job was, I was just the bus driver to take them around.
Listen to you.
And keep them out of harm's way. There's a lot of air traffic up in Northern Laos with American airplanes and Air America, Continental Air Services. Pretty bad weather half the time. And airstrikes. Raven forward air controllers be down low, calling in F4s are starting around 15,000 feet, diving through our altitude, dropping the bombs, going back up through.
What altitude did you fly at while you were there?
Well, that was super classified at the time too, but it was always 10,000 feet.
Now, why was 10,000 feet? Was that just out of 37 millimeter fire? Is that what the plan was?
No, it was, we had no oxygen on the airplane, and Above 10,000, we get goofy after either 5 or 7 hour mission. And they gave us, we were high enough to avoid most ground fire. And I always wondered if someday they'd carry a ZPU 23 millimeter, they can carry it up to the top of a mountain. There's a lot of big mountains in Northern Laos. And there's one that's over 10,000 feet.
I had heard that the cars can jut up for, thousands and thousands of feet, and guys told me that they were really difficult to navigate in.
We're always above it, and there's only the one mountain, Phobia, that was more than 10,000. And a couple airplanes have crashed on it, Air America planes, and that were off course.
Whew. Now, how close did you operate with Air America? Anything at all? Friends of yours?
Well, not at that. In the first year out of NKP, we're just avoiding each other.
Yeah.
And trying not to run into each other. And I can see them down there delivering supplies, doing airdrops and stuff, but we didn't work with them at all. But then I had a second tour at Udorn, and we were right across the street from the Air America ramp. And so I observed them a lot, and then there were 3 C-47s parked in the back of their ramp that didn't belong to Air America. I still don't know who they belonged to, but they asked us to go fly them a few times, and so I flew some airplanes off their ramp and back.
Very cool.
Unmarked, in civilian clothes, and
doing a mission of some kind, I'm certain you'd say.
Just mainly moving people, and once in a while cargo, but we're going into Laos with them usually.
Now, the one thing that I found at this reunion, and when I've talked to the Skyraider community, they were a big community, but when I'm talking to everybody at NKP, the air police were in one section, the mechanics were in another, the load masters were in another, the weapons loaders were totally separate, and there was no crossover. Did you find that same thing when you were there? And was it that way at Udorn as well?
Yeah, no interaction. Like we had that round table thing earlier, and everybody said what they did on the base. I didn't do anything on the base except sleep and eat. And our job was to leave the base. And I kind of feel sorry for these guys that do all that work to make the mission possible, and they don't even know what the mission is,
I had a gentleman in here the other day, and he was referring to the Air Force. He goes, we get a pretty rough rap. He said, the guys at the other branches will say to us, oh, the Air Force, yeah, when you build a base, you build a pool first, and then you build a golf course, and if there's enough room, you'll build a runway.
Right.
And he, he's kind of chuckling through that. Then he got real serious, and he said, but when it hit the fan, who did you call? Mm-hmm. And we came every time. And he said, it took him years to figure out that he was a piece of every rescue, of everything that happened. And that was a good point for him. Mm-hmm. When you got up there, did you feel like you were a piece of an overall project or an overall plan? Or did you feel like you were just a listening device out there?
Well, no, I thought we were helping the Hmong. The Hmong were the ones who were doing the fighting, and they're the ones that were dying over there. I've been told, and I've been trying to learn about it since we were there, because all of us in the military, it's like looking through a straw. You just see a little part. You don't know what the guy in the next thing's doing. There were less than 100 Americans in Laos at any one time, mostly CIA people and Agency for International Development, and Air America supporting them, and American military, Air Force flying, and 100 Americans held off 50 to 60,000 North Vietnamese that would have been in South Vietnam. And that was the other part of the mission, our mission. When we went in southern Laos, it was to monitor the trail, but we couldn't go over the trail because of AAA. There's, that's another misconception of the public is, and to my knowledge, in Vietnam, there was no big anti-aircraft guns. In Laos, there were 37 millimeters, hundreds of them, and they're on wheels. They move them around. They're 57 millimeter, 85 millimeter radar control guns, and at the end, the Strela handheld missiles. And lots of anti-aircraft in Laos. And that's again part of my job. Let's not fly over an anti-aircraft gun. Because they would, C-47 at Loiter speeds, they're going to hit us.
What was your speed that you'd be flying at roughly?
120 knots, 110
Not very
knots.
fast at all.
No. And we're only about, depending on where you were in Laos, we're 6,000 feet above the ground to 500 feet.
You're well within range.
Yeah.
Of everything at that point. Yeah. Wow.
I told these guys, if you want a good story, when in the rainy season, half the year it rains in Thailand, Laos. In rainy season, the bad guys run out of ammo, and the big guns stop shooting because they don't have ammo. It's too muddy. They can't get resupply. So the more into the rainy season, we could fly farther to the east towards North Vietnam, and so I was out there one day, way out to the east, probably 10 miles, 5 miles from North Vietnamese border, around Arrowhead Lake, and we call it 771 split highway that normally you couldn't fly there because of AAA. But now they had run out of ammo, so we're there all day long. And then heading south, going back to NKP, I passed two A1s going north, and they launched every day towards sundown. So in case somebody got shot down, they could try to get them out before dark. And then a couple hours later, I'm at the officers club, and my friend, it was an A1 pilot, come walking in and just looked like he'd been in a bar fight, just sweating and dirty and messed up. And his other pilot was with him. I don't know who that was. So what the hell you been doing? Where you been? He says, man, we were up at Arrowhead Lake and they just shot the crap out of us. It was terrible up there. And I was just there for 3.5 hours and they didn't shoot at me. So we didn't go back there again.
Evidently somebody got a supply between you and them.
They got supplied. And of course the other thing we had going for us, the big guns in Laos rarely fired during the day because you could see where they were. They fired at night. But so they didn't want to give away their position. So even though if we flew over one, they usually wouldn't shoot at you. And we had another thing going for us. They couldn't tell if we were a gunship or not. So they want to take a shot at us. Maybe we're a gunship and roll in and take care of them. So we didn't get shot at.
Wow. So how did you exit the military? What did you do after that?
The politically correct version? Nah. Like I say, I had one year at NKP, 1 year at, some time in Vietnam, then NKP, Udor. I went back to a SAC base to be a transportation officer. So I wrote to the commander and said, I'll be reporting with my hands up. I surrender. I'm getting out of the Air Force. I came in to fly airplanes. If I'm going to be playing with something on the ground, I'm out of here. And so I just got out after a year and 4 months in a ground job and flying part-time. I flew 120 hours in a year and a half. I was getting off several times. I think it was 100 hours a month was the limit, and we had to get a waiver for it, especially at Udorn.
That's not what you wanted to do at all.
No.
So you found your way outside. And did you keep flying after that?
Yeah, a little bit, doing flight instruction and air taxi. Nobody was hiring. There's so many pilots coming out of Vietnam, and so I ended up having to get a job and go to work for a living.
Oh no! Do you still get to fly at all anymore?
Not for the last 8 years. I owned my own airplanes for a while, for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so I don't need it anymore now. I used to fly around and take a lot of pictures out of the window.
Yeah.
Well, you got Google Earth now. I can be anywhere in the world. We can go look at Udorn if you'd like on your cell phone. And you can zoom in, zoom out.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about here, Doug?
Well, I'll say another interesting part of my time in the Air Force, I became an instructor pilot in the EC-47. And so I flew with colonels on the base that weren't on, their main job was not flying. They weren't checked out and qualified and current. So I got to fly with the commander of Task Force Alpha and the commander of the TUOC, the Intel Center. And then they invite me to, especially the Task Force Alpha, he called one day and said, I'm giving a tour, come on down. And so I got to go through that.
What was your thought when you went in that building?
It was very interesting, but
I had one of the guys in here, and he said, my first day in, he said it was like walking into Star Wars.
Yeah.
He said, I'd never seen anything like that.
And the problem was, a little politically incorrect, but I mean, they did a very wonderful job at detecting how many trucks were going down the trail. Putting a bomb on a truck was very difficult back in the day. And toward the end of my time over there, they had developed laser-guided bombs. Take one airplane to designate and one to drop the bomb. So, like somebody explained it, you used a $100,000 bomb to destroy a $10,000 truck. And there were way too many trucks than they had bombs. So
I actually read that article.
Oh.
And I remember the general talking about that. He said, it's like trying to hit ants on the way to a picnic.
Yep.
He said it was not an effective use of the weapons at all.
I'll tell you another thing that it's been a lot of years, but it upset me all these years. During that briefing, the full colonel who was in charge of TFA, or the Task Force Alpha. He was briefing the head forward air controller from South Vietnam, another full colonel. And the Task Force Alpha guy said, I don't remember either one of their names. He said, oh, you'll enjoy this, Bob. I've been ordered by the Pentagon not to disclose statistics between the Navy and the Air Force. Because the Air Force trying to hit a truck at night, they're just pickling off bombs and hoping they hit something. The Navy's got a moving target indicator on their A6, their radar. You can not only see the truck, they can lock onto it. It's going down there, one bomb, one kill. And the A6 could stay on station for 2 or 3 hours. F4 probably had 20 minutes. And
Wasn't a fair comparison at all.
no, but the Navy had a better system. But the Air Force didn't want Congress or the Pentagon to know how much better the Navy system worked.
Isn't that, last night when we were talking to that gentleman, he was talking about, and he was an Air Force Pedro pilot.
Yes.
And he was talking, and he said, let me tell you what, boys, he said, them Navy boys, he said, I'm Air Force all the way, but they could shoot. He said, and they could hit stuff. That's what he was alluding to last night.
That's right. Even the Navy planes, and I'm not an expert at it, but they had different gun sights. They had more bomb sights more basic, just almost like World War II, you know. And they got good at it. Where the Air Force had more computer-controlled bombing systems.
When we were talking last night, and this is just me asking you, we were talking, the subject came up of buffalo hunting with the drones. And I had known that there was some testing being done late 60s, early 70s. I didn't know we were actually using drones. What was buffalo hunting? When we were talking about, you said you'd seen some come back in or something like that. What were they discussing? Can you chat about that real quick?
Well, yeah, I personally had no knowledge of it, but over the years reading, you know, the Air Force had drone launching C-130s, and they'd launch and I'll back up. Later on, as a civilian, I went to work as a civilian contractor flying on those airplanes. I was a drone controller. We launched those drones, and for 7 years, it was a part-time job. But they'd take off. I think they were based at Da Nang, go out over the Gulf of Tonkin. They'd launch the Ryan Firebee drone with cameras or electronic sensors. Most likely with all cameras. I don't really know. Fly over Hanoi, take the pictures, and then, to my knowledge, they all came down by parachute, and then they were picked up off the ground. And
they were brought back?
Yeah.
And now, is that what the Pedro was doing when he was talking about last night? They would retrieve them? I couldn't tell whether he was talking, I thought he was saying they were doing aerial catching, and I'm like, that just sounds insane.
Well, I know nothing about that, and I don't understand how a Pedro could do that, because that drone weighs about 3,500 pounds. The Pedro can't even pick up their fire bottle on a hot day.
Yeah.
There's no way it could snatch a 3,500 pound object out of midair.
Let alone the inertia, and it would probably just take everything apart, you know.
Well, that, you know, it can be done. Like they recovered Mercury space capsules using the C-119 and or C-130s or something, but I've never heard it being done by a helicopter.
There was
not saying that it wasn't. I just
there was some clandestine operations, and I can't remember what they were called, but they would drop a guy way up north in China, and they'd be, you know, watching stuff come down through China, and they would run a balloon up, and then like a large aircraft would come through with the big V on the front of it and catch that rope and suck him up into the aircraft. Are you familiar with those at all?
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I'll put it this way. I know I'm very good friends with the guy that developed it. He was project officer on that program. And he's got his history of what he did with that airplane and where, but it's still very classified.
Yeah. Okay, we don't have to go there. But yeah, there was...
And if anybody said that happened, the American government would be saying, no, it didn't.
Where did you serve at all in any of the following conflicts, whether it be Desert Storm or anything like that?
No, the drone launching airplanes I was working on as a civilian contractor, we took the company, and a couple of the guys took the airplanes to Baghdad the first night to launch decoys. But I was not involved in that at all. I didn't know it was happening. It was obviously a big secret, but I know all about it after it happened now.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to chat about, Doug?
The only other interesting part of my life at Udorn, we did fly into Laos in civilian clothes, unmarked airplanes, and going to Vientiane mostly, and taking the 2-star general up there to meet with the ambassador. And the ambassador ran the war in Laos. And
that's what I had heard.
And then I was there during Linebacker 2, when we started bombing North Vietnam, linebacker 1 and 2. So I was at Udorn when all the guys became aces. We shot down a lot of MiGs during that time. They did. I say we, America.
Yep.
So I was there for all that and all the parties in the club. And you mentioned Roger Locher the other night.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was there when they brought him back in, and
Were you really?
in the club that night, and the party that was going on. And then actually, that's another side story. My buddy Zeke Encinas, the same guy I mentioned, well, you know Zeke, huh? Or did?
I
know of him.
Byron Huckey was his wingman that day he got killed.
Right.
And Zeke was very well thought of.
Well, Zeke's one I was talking about earlier. They came dragging into the club and said, "Where the hell you been, man?" And then he came over to Udorn, or called me, but I can't remember how the hell he would have called me, but he was there. He came over and he asked me, he said, "Hey, you flying these unmarked airplanes over in the back. You think I'll arrange one? Will you fly us up to Chiang Mai?" He wanted the rescue party for Roger Locher wanted to go on a little retreat. And he had with him, I happen to remember the guy's name, the Jolly Green pilot that picked up.
Dale Stovall.
Dale Stovall.
Yeah.
And the two of them were there, and I said, "Yeah." And Zeke says, "Hey, you know, he said, I want to be your co-pilot. Again, instructor pilots, I can fly with unqualified people. And the C-47 is easy to fly, one guy." He said, "I'm a tailwheel pilot. Can I sit in the other seat?" And I said, "Sure." And and so he says, "I'll get it arranged." And a couple days later, I got a phone call from somebody, I don't know who it was, some colonel, and he says, "What the hell do you think you're doing? You want to take one of my airplanes and with only one pilot and take all these guys on a trip? And that's not going to happen. I'm not going to let that happen with my airplane." And to this day, I ask everybody, I come to these things, whose airplanes were they? Because they always told me. I mean, I got checked out by a guy in civilian clothes, and he brought his two kids with him. They're 10 or 12 years old. And we went down to Bangkok. He wanted to ride with me to see if I could fly the airplane. Came back with a load of Air America cargo. And then I flew, I won't go into all the details, but I asked him one time, "Hey, do you think I could take one of those airplanes and go to Bangkok sometime?" He said, "Yeah, when do you want to go? I'll put it on here." And I could just go anywhere. And they said, So we went a couple times. I took the airplane, and he said, "Just don't try to buy gas at a military base or from the Air Force. These airplanes don't exist." And he says, "You can get fuel from Air America, but you can't get it from the Air Force." And this guy's cussing me out. He's not going to let Zeke and Dale Stovall and take it, but I don't know whose airplane to this day. And it's interesting, another part of it, one of them, I don't remember the tail number, I have it in my logbook, it crashed in El Paso, Texas, about 2 years after the war ended. And how the hell that airplane got from the back of the Air America ramp in Udorn to El Paso, Texas?
I got a pretty good idea. We'll talk after this.
Okay.
I got a pretty good idea on how that happened.
I might have too, but it would be fun when we're...
That's one of those things, that's total conjecture, and there's been enough pieces that I've heard over time that maybe, depending on where it wound up at the end of Vietnam or South Vietnam when it fell, how did it get to, I got an idea.
Well, that's one tidbit of my story too. We had several trips to Vientiane, and we'd spend time on the ground there, 4 or 5 hours, waiting for our VIP customer to come back. And sometimes we took Air Force generals, I forget their names, 2, 3-star generals that wanted to go to Laos. They'd come to Udor and go in our restroom, change their clothes into civvies, and then we'd take them up there in the civilian clothes, you know. You gotta wait for them to come back. But one of my time there, sometimes we go into town, sometimes we just stay at the airport. I went into Continental Air Services and asked, I met the guy Dick Douglas, who was a chief pilot for STOL operations. So I'd like to, what I need to do to work here. And we talked for a while, and he says, well, as soon as you get out of the Air Force, I'll give you a job. And so I spent the next 1.5 years trying to get out of the Air Force, and the war ended before I did, so I never went back to go to work for them.
Those were some cool aircraft.
Yep.
I had a friend of mine that would ferry those to South America, and he and another guy, they'd take 2, and they were discussing, if an engine goes out over the ocean, what's your plan? And the one guy said, I'm just going to point the nose down. I don't want to be out there swimming with the sharks. He's thinking, there's nobody out here to save you.
Yeah. So I had a lot of...
Lagos, Nigeria is where they were ferrying those 2.
Oh, yeah. You go across over to the island out there.
Yeah.
Getting old, don't remember those names.
That's fine.
And so I had a lot of varied experience in 2 years, and I got 1,000 hours in EC-47 1 year, 1,000 hours at Udor in the second year. You don't get 1,000 hours a year in the Air Force.
It's a lot of flying.
Yeah, and of course we were flying 5 or 7 hours a day, so.
It added up.
Yeah.
So your technical designation, you were in the Air Force, but you flew in sterile aircraft most of the time?
Not most of the time, but the Air Force airplane, there was EC-47.
Okay.
We just, there's no question that the Air Force owned them, and we were Air Force people, but they wanted us to
not look like Air Force people.
Yeah.
I got you.
And this story they told us, which if we got shot down in the EC-47, they wanted the security service people that had a lot of knowledge of secret stuff. They didn't know who they were or who some dumb pilot is, you know. And so I don't know any secrets. Don't beat me up.
I'm just flying the plane, man.
Yeah. And you know, Baron 5-2 was the call sign with Baron. It was EC-47. They got shot down in Laos a week after the ceasefire, and everybody died there. And that's another big controversy that you're probably aware of. But
that one I hadn't heard of. So Baron 47?
5-2.
Baron 5-2.
But they found the bodies of all 4 aircrew members, but they didn't find one body of security service people. And the big conspiracy thing is they were spirited off to North Vietnam or to Russia or to China or somewhere, never to be seen again. They're still MIA. And
Duke, one of the security police, was saying in '75, after the war was over, there'd be F-4s that would land at NKP, and they were shot to pieces. And he's, this is well after the war was over, so there was still something going on, definitely in the intelligence gathering.
Yeah, I really don't know.
Yeah.
The only time F-4s would be at NKP is if they had severe battle damage, and a short runway is better than no runway, because they normally would need more. I forgot what we had, 6,000 foot runway.
No, he was, I'm pretty sure he said it was NKP, but maybe, we were talking about NKP and Utapao a bunch, and Utapao was B-52 base, but
Yeah.
that was much farther away.
Well, things were going on in Cambodia after the ceasefire. I don't know how long, but maybe a year. So.
That was pretty rough in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Doug, is there anything else you'd like to chat about?
No, you're a good interrogator. You got more out of me than I expected.
I didn't even have to ply you with alcohol. I thought I was going to have to come hard and heavy.
No waterboarding or anything?
No waterboarding. I try to make it easy.
Yeah.